Our readings this weekend are about freedom. Freedom is something that we all aspire to. Nobody wants to not be free. Although it's important to know, especially as we've been talking about, as we're more and more in this post-Christian world, to know that freedom, the different views of freedoms. There's the Christian view of freedom. That's the biblical, classical view of freedom that Aristotle and the like hold to. And then there's the modern view of freedom. And knowing the difference between these two views of freedom are crucial. It can be the difference of making or breaking a marriage. It can be the difference of making or breaking a priesthood. It can be the difference of setting yourself on firm foundation of entering into a future relationship, or having weak foundation of entering in and having relationships that lead to just frustration. Having the correct view of freedom, the biblical view or classical view of freedom, can inspire us to live a life that leads to flourishing and happiness. Whereas getting it wrong and having the wrong view of freedom can lead to frustration, disappointment, loneliness. So there's a lot riding on knowing these two different views of freedom. So what we want to do is look at what is the modern understanding of freedom and how it's unworkable. And secondly, what's the Christian biblical view of freedom? And then thirdly, how are we to be set free? So first, the modern understanding of freedom. The culture defines freedom this way. Freedom is the license to do whatever you want, whenever you want to do it. It's to remove all restrictions, all restraints, so that I can determine who I am. That I'm free from any outside restrictions, forces, laws. That's the cultural understanding of freedom, and it runs rampant in our culture and our society. It's, a number of years ago, there was a blockbuster movie, Disney movie, Frozen, right? Great movie. So seen it many times with my nieces and nephews. Two princesses, one of them, Elsa, she sings this song, where in that song she says, "It's time to see what I can do, to test the limits and break through. No right, no wrong, no rules for me, I'm free." I know that song well enough that I could have sang that right there. So good. Like, you're lucky I did not sing that. But that's the narrative. That's the narrative that is so engulfed in our culture and society right there. It's in everything we breathe in. We don't even notice it. But that's in all the cartoons. I mean, just about all the cartoons is that right there. No right, no wrong, no rules for me, I'm free. I need to break away from society, from family, so that I can determine who I am. I determine who I am. No limits, no restrictions. Now, that narrative is extremely damaging. It's not biblical. And it's not what we're made for. And it doesn't work. And I think we can see that easily, that it doesn't work, by just looking at it just from a couple different lenses. One is freedom can't be the ability to do whatever I want to do. It leads to chaos. Think about even just leaving here and just driving on the left side of the road. Like, it's chaos. Well, at least I'm free to choose it. Okay, yeah. So for a little bit, for a while, until you won't be able to do it. Like, literally, physically, you'll be up against not being able to do it. Lead to death. So that's like on the physical level, but also it's true, we know from on a metaphysical level. What I mean is, if one just has the understanding of freedom, that it's freedom from restrictions, and that is I can do whatever I want to do, whenever I want to do it, What it is that you'll never know love. You'll never have it. Because the minute you get into a love relationship, the deeper you get into a relationship, that as it progresses and it moves deeper into more intimacy, what ultimately happens is freedom in one area diminishes. I lose my independence in a sense. So when you get into a loving relationship, whether that's in a marriage, a friendship, any deep friendship, you can't just leave town for a weekend. You can't just go golf. You've got to check in. And if you don't check in, if it's just I'm leaving town this weekend, or I'm going to play golf, the person you're in a relationship will say, well, that doesn't work for me. This weekend doesn't work, or tonight doesn't work, and you break off and say, honey, no right, no wrong, no rules for me. I'm free. That will be the end of the relationship. It doesn't work. The classical view of freedom, the biblical view of freedom, freedom is not to do whatever I want to do. Rather, freedom is to do what I ought to do. That's the biblical view of freedom. The classical view of freedom. Freedom is I'm free to do what I ought. Paul, it's like the chapter in the Bible for freedom. Paul in Galatians chapter 5, we heard in our second reading, he says, for freedom Christ has set you free. And just so that those that he's writing, he knows they might lend it to this spot of, okay, well, I'm just free to do whatever I want to do. I'm set free from this. Christ has set us free from the law of all the Old Testament laws. And Paul in verse 13 then goes on to say, for you are called to freedom, brothers and sisters, but do not use this freedom as an opportunity for the flesh. When Paul says the flesh in the New Testament, he's talking about don't waste your freedom on serving yourself, of just self-interest, seeking your own interest, of just following the appetites. He says, do not use this freedom for that opportunity. Rather, serve one another through love. That's the point of freedom. That's what freedom is. The point of freedom is not so that we can turn in on ourselves and do whatever I want to do, whenever I want to do it, with whomever I want to do it. But freedom is to turn us outward for the service of the other. And it's for love. It's for sacrifice. But we've got to submit ourselves. The classical view of freedom is that one isn't truly free unless they submit themselves under some intense disciplinary structure for some period of time. And then what happens is one becomes disciplined. And they emerge from that as someone who's then free. So think of like playing the piano. Someone sits you down on the piano. Are you free to play the piano? You're not free. You sit down on the piano and it won't be pleasant to listen to. You've got to submit yourself underneath this disciplinary structure of the rules to play the piano. And then you can emerge from that and freely play. Same is the case with golf. Right now I'm in that spot. I used to be good at golf. I used to be free. My golf swing was free. It's not free right now. I'm standing over the ball. I'm not free because I've fallen away from putting myself under this intense disciplinary structure of the golf swing. What we have to do is submit. The question then for us today is, how do we get free? The answer is for us to listen is to submit to Jesus. As he says in the gospel, in his gentle command, follow me. Follow me. And we might, the world then, especially if anything runs up against freedom, the cultural narrative of freedom, what the culture understands as freedom, if anything does, it's Christianity. All right, I might understand the physical sense of can't get in my car and do whatever I want and drive on the left side of the road. Metaphysical level, you can't enter, you can't not fully know love with that understanding of freedom. Okay, but Christianity, to submit myself to a moral framework, that's restrictive. That takes away my freedom. Paul says, did you hear what he says? He says, for freedom Christ has set you free, not to fall back into the slavery of sin. So he says, be careful, no right, no wrong, no rules for me, because ultimately what it will lead to for you, it will lead to you and I becoming slaves. Slaves to sin, which is the worst kind of slavery. Like, you can choose to do the wrong. I can choose to do the wrong, but the very choice of doing the wrong, the very choice of doing it is an abuse to freedom, and that leads to slavery to sin. And every person, we know this to be true. Take any command, take the Lord's command to forgive, to not hold a grudge. Go ahead and not forgive. Choose that and see what it does, right? See what it does. It can destroy our health. It makes us become a slave. Choose the affair. It makes you a slave. You feel trapped. It makes everything else worse. That our culture promotes free to do whatever you want. Have unbridled sex. It trains you to objectify, to not be free to love. But rather, if one, on the other hand, puts themselves under the discipline of chastity, a daily effort in growing in chastity, it increases steadily my ability over time to love. Whether one is a 15, 16, 17, 18-year-old, I can begin to put myself under this intense structure of chastity so as to better love my future spouse. Freedom, the purpose of freedom is to love. It's in service of the other. It's to sacrifice. Maybe I want to end here just with the quote from the Catechism, paragraph 1733, that says, the more one does what is good, the freer one becomes. The more one does what is good, the freer one becomes. So let us not listen to the culture, no right, no wrong, no rules for me, because that ultimately makes us a slave. Rather, submit to Jesus Christ in all his ways and follow him, because he went to the cross. He's the only religion where God says, I will give up my freedom. I will go to the cross. I will sacrifice for you. And when we give our lives to him is when we'll truly be free.